Hi and welcome to this new video about semantic kernel using large language model exposed locally by LM Studio. In this small video, I show you how you can configure differently your semantic kernel, avoiding to use that experimental method I showed you in the previous video, but using only a different technique supported by the .NET framework to avoid using an experimental function. Basically, in this example, we only look at the different technique for having semantic kernel to use local large language model exposed by LM Studio. You can configure semantic kernel just making him believe that it is using OpenAI, but instead, with the ability to customize an HTTP client in .NET, you can create an HTTP client that will perform an automatical redirect from the original address of OpenAI to localhost. And you simply configure semantic kernel to use a specific instance of HTTP client, and the magic is done. You are not using any experimental function. You are using only the basic stable configuration of semantic kernel. The only thing you can do is completely transparent from the perspective of semantic kernel. You tell semantic kernel to use an HTTP client that at runtime it will switch the call to a local call. And thanks to the fact, as I told you before, that LM Studio is exposing model using the same HTTP call, the same post, the same JSON schema of OpenAI, from the point of view of semantic kernel, it is calling OpenAI, but instead the call will be redirected to a local call. The only thing you need to do is creating an HTTP client handler. This is a specific class that allows to control how an HTTP call is made through the standard class HTTP client. Now, I use my customized class that inherits from the base HTTP client handler, and you need to override the function sendAsync that is passed a request and a cancellation token. Now, thanks to this class, I can simply take the request, verifying that the request is done through the API to api.openai.com, and I simply say every request that is directed to the domain api.openai.com, they will be redirected, all the requests, to HTTP localhost 1234. That is the port of local LM Studio. So as you can see, semantic kernel will not know anything about this. It is done at a lower level in the stack. Semantic kernel is calling OpenAI through HTTP client, but instead, the request, instead of going to api.openai.com, it will be redirected to the local model. Now, as you can see, when you configure your semantic kernel with the add OpenAI check completion, there are no pragma directive because this is a stable method. This is not experimental. So I need to specify the name of the model. As you can see, it's a local model. As I show you in the previous video, I usually have multiple models configured in LM Studio, so I can choose which model to call through this parameter. And then you should check that the API key is just a random string, because if you pass null, the semantic kernel will throw exception because it is not supposed to work without an API key. LM Studio, local installation of LM Studio does not require API key. If you don't configure an API key, you can pass anything to the API key. But from the point of view of semantic kernel, it is calling OpenAI. So a key is required. So you can pass whatever string you want. Then I use my service ID. So I can use multiple instances, as I show you in the previous video, multiple instances of OpenAI shell completion directing to different model exposed by LM Studio. But then I simply pass an HTTP client, and in the constructor of HTTP client, I pass my proxy OpenAI handler that is doing the magic of redirecting every call to OpenAI to the local model. Okay, now I can running all the example, and as you will see, is simply go to my local large language model. As I show you in LM Studio, I have my call. I can clear and call again just to show you that indeed the call is made to my local model. And so, as you can see, in this way, you can use a local model without using an experimental function of semantic kernel. So probably it is much more stable code, and you don't fear that your code could be broken because in some future release, semantic kernel is going to remove the other function we see in the previous example that was marked as experimental. To conclude this video, it is important to know different way of using semantic kernel to call your local large language model. And this is important because with this example, I show you how you can configure semantic kernel in a way that is transparent for semantic kernel, the fact that the call is not made to OpenAI. I'm not using any experimental function. I'm using only the standard way of configuring my semantic kernel instance. So everything is completely transparent from the point of view of semantic kernel. And in my opinion, that it's probably a better solution. So I hope you like this video. Bye-bye, and I'm waiting you for the next one.